it's really a misnomer because there's only 9 more occurrences overall in all those categories. So again, there was no specific prolific person, address, or reason why those numbers have risen. Our drug crime was a reduction in 50%, and there was only 1 charge of possession. So Q4 was incredibly quiet for our drug investigations, and that's moving on to the busier season from the summer. And there was no indication. There are our street crime officer is obviously actively involved, but he's also actively involved in other communities, not being dedicated, but also sourcing information for other communities for our Organized Crime Enforcement Bureau. Excuse me. Moving on to the next page is our clearance rates. And you'll see our clearance rates are 68.9% as a whole. Our violent crime clearance rates 87%, and our property crime is 42.1%, and drug crime obviously is 1% because we only had that 1 charge. As a 68.9% overall is above the national average. The national average for property crime is around 37%, so we're well above that in percentage points. And to our criminal record and vulnerable sector screening checks, over this quarter as last 2018 quarter, we saw a 2.9% decrease, but again, that's from 70 to 68, so it's not substantial. But a year over year, what we saw was a 15.1% increase. If we look at the year to date, as 298 criminal record checks. So I want to bring to your attention that, and I've said that before to your worship, that's certainly a large workload for one person or a detachment to carry. But since COVID-19 and pandemic has come into play, the OPP has went to a centralized criminal record check system. So now we're downloading that to essential locations within the province. So we're able to, reinvest that person to the detachment to more meaningful work for the municipality.
Thank you.
Moving on to the integrated court offense network, and this is really where you see what our number of charges are within the quarter. As we look down, our highway traffic debt charges within the quarter was 92, and that was a 20% reduction over the 2018 Q4. But again, 115 in 2018 Q4 to 92. There's several variables that play into these offense notices. Some of them, most of them obviously in speeding, it's very proactive. So when we look at manpower, our vacation, training, different types of leaves that affect staffing levels, that's in a direct correlation with the proactive traffic enforcement and or sometimes proactive criminal traffic offenses such as impaired driving. Going to our criminal code traffic, we had 34 charges within the October, November, and December of 2019, and it showed a 47.7 decrease over the last quarter of 2018. Criminal code non-traffic was a 22.9% decrease at 290. However, that's 290 criminal charges within a quarter is quite high. That does numbers are also incorporated from Pikangikum, but that is a direct correlation of the workload. Our court case management and our prisoner escorts do have a back end, a lot of work on that as well. Liquor License Act specifically for the municipality was only 4. And other violations, and that's to do with compulsory automobile insurance act charges, motorized snow vehicle charges, and all-terrain vehicle charges was 20, and that was an 11.1 actual increase. So our officers concentrated a little bit more on stopping some of those different vehicles, and were able to produce some effective proactive charges. As we move down to our big 4, and our big 4 is, we know traffic related offenses that are the leading cause of death within Ontario. It's speeding, seatbelt, impaired, and distracted driving. The speeding in last quarter, we had 49 speeding charges in 2019 Q4. Seatbelts were 4 charges. Impaireds were 20. And the distracted driving, we did not have any distracted driving charges. And as I said before, when some of you might drive down the road and you see somebody on their cell phone, distracted driving is very hard for us to prove. There's a lot of elements that offense that we have to meet and able to charge them for that, and the fine is quite high for that. And as we look, that concludes the Q4. I'm going to save the year-end report, the year-end numbers on the other side, just for my year-end report, subject to any questions right now. The public complaints. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I thought you were asking for questions. Go ahead.
No, I was just pausing to see if there was any, just to stop at that point. Our public complaints, I'm happy to say there are no public complaints in the Q4 of 2019. Our intelligence-led policing, this number is grown quite low in past years due to Bill C-75 that came out that has a lot of restrictions on what conditions that we as police officers can put on people once they're released on additional interim release, such as we can't put a curfew on them. We have to leave that to the courts, and there's only very specific release conditions that we can put on them. So our intelligence-led policing crime abatement strategy is basically aimed at checking people that are released on conditions, and there's only certain conditions that we can check them on. And unfortunately, we've seen a really big drop in that. However, we only had two in the fourth quarter of 2019. We had 2 offenders in that program, and we checked them 4 times. We do have to, if we do check them and they are compliant, we usually give them a little bit of leeway, and we check them again a little bit later on. If they show high recidivism, then we'll check them more frequently. But these 2 particular offenders were abiding by their conditions. As we move down to our daily activity reporting hours, number of cruiser patrol hours was 362.5 within our municipality within Q4. And all the other numbers are blank until we get down to number of foot patrol hours, and there are 35.5 hours of foot patrol within our municipality, as well as 75.25 hours of foot patrol within our schools. Our staffing updates, PC Nick Lockhart transferred to the Caledon detachment in December. And at that time in Q4 of 2019, our detachment was carrying 5 constable vacancies. 1 recruit was to be reporting to the Ear Falls detachment in early February, and an additional 3 recruits were to arrive in early June, 2 being posted to Red Lake detachment and 1 being posted to the Ear Falls detachment. That's the completion of the 2019 Q4 report, subject to any questions.
Thank you very much. Does any councillor have any question for the staff sergeant? Councillor Hager, please go ahead. Yep, your mute button.
Just a sec. There we go. Sorry about that. No, I'm just wondering, are you at full complement now or not?
We're not.
With regard, oh, you're not.
No, we're not. So all of those aforementioned recruits that I indicated, they're all at detachment now. So to give you a bit of a prelude, they call it the COVID-19 class. So when COVID broke out, we had our 1 recruit came for Ear Falls in February. He's been there since February. He's working out very, very well. We just got our 3 recruits, 2 in Red Lake and 1 in Ear Falls. They reported 2 weeks ago. What had happened was they weren't supposed to arrive until June, but due to the pandemic, their training was shortened at our provincial police academy. They completed their whole Ontario Police College, their 16 weeks there, and then they were supposed to have 8 weeks within our provincial police academy, our own OPP academy. And that's where we do a little bit more increased training on our policy and procedures just within the OPP. And if I will, I can tout that it's just heightened training for them when they come out into the field and they're ready to go. Unfortunately, they were shortened by 4 weeks. So to answer your question, we're still not at full staff. We still have currently 4 vacancies based on other transfers. And in July, we're going to be coming up on 5 vacancies. So we're still carrying 4 at present time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And just a couple comments. It's nice to see the violent crime statistics going down in a trend, which is good. We're down almost 21%. The one concern I still have is the amount of DUIs, and we had 20 in the fourth quarter, which is still concerning, not only for myself, but for the residents of this municipality. Are we going to be stepping up any type of road checks?
It's difficult in this, Your Worship, in the pandemic. We do have our officers out there day and night that are patrolling specific locations that do produce impaired driving, but with all the different closures and our proactive and our social distancing, you'll notice that we haven't been doing a lot of ride stops, reduce impaired driving everywhere stops. We're trying to mitigate that, but at the same time, this is not abnormal for Red Lake area. We do, and historically we've had high number of impaired driving cases. We are equipped at our detachment, as I've said before. We do have several breathalyzer technicians. We also have 2 drug recognition experts, and we also, almost all of our frontline officers are field sobriety standard testing trained. So we do have all the tools that we need to be able to combat impaired driving. The unfortunate part of it is we're still trying to do the social distancing piece and not doing rides as frequent as we have before. I think that when we look at different strategies, that's one strategy. The other strategy is education. That's where our school liaison officers come in and they present, and they're going around to our schools and imparting that, substance abuse and driving, whether it be your motorized vehicle or your all-terrain vehicle, is obviously a high risk behavior. So that's one of the things that we're also looking at, is the education piece to that, as well as the enforcement piece.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I know it's difficult times right now going through this COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you for everything that you do. And please send council's regards to all the officers stationed here. Thank you very much.
I will. Thank you.
And you're more than welcome to continue to Zoom to watch us speak, or you can hit your depart button.
Did you want me to briefly go over the year-end report? I'd just like to touch on a couple of things with reference to calls for service.
I thought you were saying, no, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll briefly go over the year-end report and just hit some different points. For your awareness, I did complete our detachment. Under the OPP, we had a 2017-2019 strategic plan, which we've just completed, obviously, at the end of 2019. And following in the footsteps of Staff Sergeant Crabb, now Inspector Crabb, finishing off the 2019 year with our strategic plan, which I believe we did fare out very well. And I've completed our progress report, which should be published and released shortly. And I'll certainly get a copy to your worship and council for your review. Moving on to the actual 2019 report, calls for service. Overall, as you can see, we did have a 3.2% increase in calls for service over 2018, with a total of 14,932 calls for service. A detachment of our size, even connected with Pikangikum, as you see, is carrying a load. That's a significant amount given our command structure and our manpower and the resources that we're given to do that and to mitigate through that process. So in Pikangikum, there was a 10,643 calls for service, which is very, very high. In Red Lake, we saw only a 0.2% increase of 3,758. And in Muir Falls, we saw a 14.5% decrease, which is a year over year. In the past 3 years, there's been a decrease in calls in Muir Falls to 531 calls for service. As we move over, I just want to iterate, unfortunately, we haven't started off 2020 in the same way, but in our detachment area in the whole year of 2019, we didn't have one fatality and to do with traffic, which I think is testament to, I think, not just, and I don't want to put it on our officers, but I also want to put it on the municipality and the residents of our municipality operating their motor vehicles safely, as we see the reduction in motor vehicle collisions altogether. I'll just do a highlight on all of it. Is a 21.9% decrease in property damage, personal injury, and no fatals. So that's excellent for the residents. And I know when speaking to officers, when they're out on patrol and when I go out on patrol, seatbelt use is very high, speeds are very reasonable, and most residents are practicing safe driving habits, which is encouraging. Moving over to our the violent crime, unfortunately, as a year over year, there were some numbers that were different from, if you'll see on the column, from our Q4 2019 to year to date. If you look at the year to date, there is some discrepancy between 2 and 3. I have put a call into our ICON people, and I do believe that the only discrepancy, the only reason for that is the time that I actually ran the reports off. And reports numbers are dumped into a certain software at different times. So I might have missed a cutoff only by a couple of days. So I will get that answer to you, though, Your Worship, to make sure that we're all steady on that. But I've used the numbers from our year-end 2019 Q4 report, excuse me. So although we did see in violent crime a 9.9% increase, it's not over and above when you count the incidences out just to say that we're in a screaming increase that we need to formulate a task force or any kind of different remedies other than our proactive patrol and increase our investigations and do quality investigations. As we go down to our property crime, you'll see overall a 25.6% increase. And I know I've talked to the council before in my previous presentations that we had one specific prolific person and an address that caused an abnormal amount of property crime with break-in-enters, theft-unders, and mischiefs. And that person was held accountable for that. So almost single-handedly, with given those numbers, that person caused that increase there. And our drug crime, proactive drug crime down 79.2%. We all do know that drugs are within our community, but we have done some very specific targeted enforcement for that, and we've done significant reductions in that. So to explain that difference to ICON, I will get that information to you. But as I said, on the widest span, there was only 3 occurrences of difference. So it wasn't an abnormal to skew the numbers to any certain degree. In our clearance rates, I'll just say that we're routinely above average in our clearance rates, not only in violent crime, but also in property crime, which is testament to really good investigations and cooperative people within our residents within our municipality. And the vulnerable sector criminal screening checks, again, they were very high, caused a very high workload, but we're going to a central system that's going to reduce our workload within the municipality and get one of our detachment admin clerks concentrated on different tasks that will assist us. In 2019 public complaints, we had 2 conduct complaints to officers that was informally resolved, and that was to do with occurrence that was not in actually in Red Lake at the time. It was in Picanskin First Nations, and both of those officers were held accountable. However, it was informally. 1 member was granted secondary employment, and this member is operating a small graphic design business. And before they became an OPP officer, they did work for a larger graphic design firm, and they're doing small jobs, so they were granted that. And they do have some clients within Red Lake. A little bit more when we reverse back into Q1, Q2, and Q3 for intelligence-led policing crime abatement strategy. We did have, through the whole year, we had 8 offenders in the program. 3 offenders were charged and 10 charges were laid as a result of proactive checks on those offenders. And the number of checks were only 6. So a high yield of charges based on not a lot of checks on those recidivist criminals. As a whole, our number of cruiser patrol hours was 1,422 within our municipality. Marine patrol hours were 210.5, which is quite high for around Red Lake, which is excellent to see, and we're going to continue that this year. Number of snow machine hours was 32.5 within our municipality. Foot patrols were 187.5, and number of school patrols were 200. And as I said, our officers are actively in our schools and educating our youth on safe practices and healthy living. Our staffing updates, so a total of 5 members transferred out of the Red Lake Detachment in 2019. At the end of 2019, Councillor Hager, we were operating at 76.5% capacity. Red Lake is scheduled to, and I'll skip that because we know that I explained the recruits. And Sergeant Ewald, he's already returned from his UN mission deployment to Ukraine. Unfortunately, he was pulled out about a month and a half early due to the pandemic. The RCMP withdrew most, and the OPP withdrew most of our officers that are on UN deployments. I was promoted to detachment commander during 2019, and Sergeant Dave Lamy was promoted to team leader sergeant within the Red Lake Detachment. Chris Amell was a recipient of the Order of Merit of Police Services, which is a very prestigious award, as well as 25 years of service. And PC Collin received the Commissioner's Citation for Bravery, and PC Hunter received the Commissioner's Citation for Life-Saving. And just a very quick overview, our detachment initiatives, we've been very involved with community mobilization in the Red Lake Circle Situation Table, as well as the police hospital transition framework with our hospital. Working with Sue Lebeau has been a pleasure over these past several months, and we're making great headway into that. As well, our mobile crisis response program is making extremely strong headway in reducing the amount of calls and involvement of police with the mental health sector. I'm going to cut it off there because I've been rambling on a little bit longer, subject to any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant Norlock. Does any councillor have any further questions? Seeing none, thank you again for that detailed report. We truly appreciate it. And again, thank you for your work that you're doing, especially during these difficult times through our pandemic and COVID-19, and to all of your officers, and please send them council's regards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, everyone.
So moving on, we'll move down to our next delegation, which is 3.2. And please welcome Jason LeBlanc from the Northern Waterworks. He's going to do us a short presentation from the 2019 annual drinking water system for Balmertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, Madsen, and Red Lake. Welcome, Jason, to our Zoom. And the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council for the invitation. I'll just do a quick audio check. Can everybody hear me? And for presentation format, I thought I would, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I thought I would share screen so that members of council and members of the public might be able to see the presentation as I walk through it. So I'll just try sharing my screen here. Can everybody see that?
It's fabulous.
Excellent. So the purpose of the invitation and the meeting here tonight is to review the 2019 annual drinking water reports for the Red Lake, Bombertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, and Madsen drinking water systems. The annual reports follow calendar years. So the 2019 annual report covers the period January the 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. Just a quick introduction about the legislative requirement to prepare these annual reports. In Ontario Regulation 170.03, there's two separate sections of the regulation that require an annual report to be prepared. Section 11 of Ontario Regulation 170.03 requires a report to be prepared, which is intended for the general public, users of the drinking water system. And Schedule 22 of Ontario Regulation 170.03 requires a second annual report to be prepared, which is primarily, in that case, intended for the benefit of municipal council. So what we do is, since there's a lot of overlap between the reporting requirements of each respective report, we combine them into one consolidated report, which is intended to fulfill both annual reporting requirements. In accordance with Ontario Regulation 170.03, Section 11, a copy of the annual report is required to be provided to any member of the public who requests a copy free of charge. And accordingly, we make those reports available on Northern Waterworks website and on the Municipality of Red Lake's website. There's also a hard copy kept available that's available for viewing by members of the public at the Red Lake Municipal Office. I thought I would open up the web browser just to show members of the public who might be watching the live stream where they can find those annual reports. So on Northern Waterworks website, nwi.ca, under the title menu publications, we see publications, annual drinking water reports. There's a link to click here, and my internet works. That brings up a list of all the annual reports that we prepared for all of the drinking water systems that we operate. And at the bottom, we can see the 3 reports for the Bombertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, Madsen, and Red Lake drinking water systems. And on the municipality's website, under menu, there's plans, reports, and studies. And if members of the public scroll down to reports, we can see the 2019 annual reports available, and they can follow that link. I'm just going to open the presentation back up. The annual reports go on to provide a brief description of each drinking water system. For the purposes of this meeting, I won't walk through the details of that description. The treatment facility descriptions have not changed materially in 2019. We could summarize it by saying that each of the drinking water systems in the municipality of Red Lake draws surface water from a lake. In the case of Bombertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, and Red Lake, the lake is Red Lake, and in the case of Madsen, it's Russet Lake. We draw that water in, we add a chemical coagulant or coagulants that bind small particles together and clump them into larger particles. Once we've clumped the particles into larger particles, we pass it through a sand media filter. We remove those large particles, and once the water is cleaned up, we add a disinfecting chemical, some form of chlorine, to disinfect the water. We hold it for a period of time to make sure that the chlorine has had enough contact time to disinfect the water properly, and then we distribute it to users of the drinking water system. So that's a brief description of how each drinking water system functions. Section 2.2 of the annual report discusses treatment chemicals that are used in each of those treatment processes. Again, the treatment chemicals that we used in 2019 didn't materially change from previous years. So I won't go into details about the specifics of those treatment chemicals. But in general, they involved a chemical that we use to coagulate the water and a chemical that we use to disinfect the water. And lastly, a chemical that we use to alter the pH or alkalinity of the water to make the water more stable so that it's not corrosive as we send it out and distribute it to residential homes and businesses. Section 2.3 of the annual report lists significant expenses that we incurred in 2019. We break these expenses down into different categories depending on the nature of the expense. So new equipment means equipment that didn't previously exist, and it's a new addition, a new asset that we've added. Inventory means we're building up our inventory of spare parts, critical components, so that if during the course of the year there's a critical piece of equipment that fails, we have a spare component on the shelf ready to replace it. Replacement category means a piece of equipment broke down and we dipped into our inventory to replace it with a new component. I won't get into detail about all of the specific expenses, but they're all listed in the annual report if anybody's interested in reviewing those, or if anybody has any questions about them, I would certainly be happy to answer those. Section 3 of the annual report, specifically section 3.2, discusses results of microbiological sampling that we conducted in the 2019 calendar year. Microbiological samples are collected of the raw water source, the treated water before we distribute it to residents, and then we collect samples throughout the distribution system from plumbing connected to the water distribution network. We collect these samples weekly. That's why we see 52 raw water and 52 treated water samples. And then every week we collect 2 or 3 distribution samples. So we see 157 of those. I think the most important part to highlight here is the results of our E. coli and total coliform sampling, which show that all samples that we collected in 2019 or total coliform bacteria were found to be present. So all of our sample results came back absent of those bacteria. And that's for the Red Lake drinking water system in this slide. And then we see the same for Bombertown, Kosher, Mackenzie Island drinking water system. And again, I would point out the most important part of this is the section that highlights that neither E. coli nor total coliform bacteria were found in any of the samples that we collected in 2019. And here's the same thing for Madsen. And again, no E. coli or total coliform bacteria found present in the treated water samples that we collected. Section 3.3 of the annual report reviews operational parameters. These are parameters that we test for in-house, either using laboratory equipment on a bench scale, or by equipment that we have that continuously monitors the water quality as the water passes through the treatment process. And that's distinguished by the sampling method. A grab sample is a sample that an operator collected, brought back to the laboratory, and analyzed using an instrument, whereas the continuous monitoring is done by an analyzer that continuously monitors the water quality 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and is hooked to alarms that would alert an operator to if one of these parameters fell outside of the desired range, operating range. So I would say the most important results that we see here are the results that have associated adverse water quality parameters. So In the case of filter effluent turbidity, which is continuously monitored, at no time should the turbidity be above 1 NTU. And we see based on the, if we look at the maximum filter effluent turbidity results, we did not exceed that value at all in the 2019 calendar year. And further down, we see our chlorine residual results. So FCR stands for free chlorine residual. And this is monitored both by continuous analyzer and by grab samples collected by operators in the water distribution subsystem. So an adverse chlorine residual result in the distribution system would be a result below 0.05 milligrams per liter. And if we look at the minimum results that we measured in the Red Lake drinking water system, at 0.35, we maintained chlorine residual above that value. On the next slide, we see the similar test results from the Bombertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island drinking water system. And again, I would just quickly point out that if we look at the filter turbidity results, none of the results exceeded the maximum acceptable concentration, which would constitute an adverse test result. And if we look at the chlorine residual results from Bombertown and Cochenour, the minimum chlorine residual values that we measured were at all times above the minimum required. And here we see the same thing in Madsen. The maximum filter effluent turbidity results that we measured fell below the level that would constitute an adverse water quality result. And our chlorine residuals were good here too. In terms of filter effluent turbidity, we're required to maintain a filter effluent turbidity below 0.3 NTU 95% of the time. So in 95% of the measurements that we take in each month. And we can see the results from all of the drinking water systems were near perfect. So we met that legislative requirement at all times. Briefly in the Red Lake water treatment plant, we had filter effluent turbidity briefly go above 0.3 NTU, which isn't uncommon. It's an older drinking water system. The newer systems have an automatic feature that if the filter effluent turbidity reaches 0.3 NTU, the treatment plant automatically shuts off. Red Lake, as an older facility, doesn't have that, but we're still well in compliance with our 95% requirement here.
99.98% is pretty close.
Right, so there was a couple of seconds in the year that we exceeded 0.3 NTU.
Yeah, good.
There's a brief discussion in the annual reports about nitrates and nitrites. This is a parameter or two parameters that we test quarterly. I won't spend any time on it simply because if we look at the Ontario Drinking Water or nitrate, it is 10 milligrams per liter. And for nitrite, the standard is 1 milligram per liter. And we've never, in 22 years, we've never come even remotely close to reaching those. So these are parameters that you would more likely experience a problem with a drinking water system that uses a groundwater source. As a surface water source in all of our treatment facilities, we've never had a problem with these parameters, so I'll just skip through them. Also quarterly, we collect samples for disinfection byproducts, specifically trihalomethanes. And as of 2017, a new disinfection byproduct that we monitor for is called haloacetic acids. And there's tables presented in the annual reports that summarize the results of those. I'll talk about these in a little more detail in the subsequent slides. But there was one odd result that we received in August of 2019. Our trihalomethane sample result came back at 160. And concurrently, our haloacetic acid sample result came back at 2.2. So those are, interestingly enough, the very highest trihalomethane sample result we've ever measured and the very lowest haloacetic acid test result we've ever measured. And at first we thought it might be a problem with the sample, either a problem at the laboratory, maybe an analytical error associated with these samples, or possibly an error on the part of the operator who collected the samples. For example, if there's any air in the sample bottle while the sample is in shipment, these are volatile organic chemicals. and the chemical can escape from the water into the air, which could, for example, result in a really low anomalous value like this 2.2 that we saw in the haloacetic acids. So what we did is we resampled, and the resample results came back similar. So something happened there, something unusual that we've never seen before. We did research a little bit, and the best explanation that we could come up with is there's a scenario in which haloacetic acids can decompose or break down, and in the process of breaking down, they can cause THMs to form. That explanation would explain why we simultaneously measured our lowest haloacetic acid result at the same time that we measured our highest trihalomethane result. So that was the explanation that we came up with. We thought we might see it again in our fourth quarter sampling, but we didn't. So it was an anomaly. It came, it went, and we'll be looking out for it again in the future, but it seems to just be an anomalous occurrence. I thought I would look a little more closely at our THM results over time. So here, this isn't actually included in the annual report. It's something that I thought I would include in the presentation though. So we're now looking back at our trihalomethane sampling for the Red Lake drinking water system dating back to 2011 to 2019. And I would just, the reason why I thought I would present it is if we look at the sample results from the first quarter in 2011 through 14, it was not uncommon to have sample results of 70, 80, 90 parts per billion. And if we look at the last 2 years, we see values that are much lower in the first quarter of the year, so January, February, March. So what we see there is an improving trend in the sample results from the last 2 years are the lowest two values we've seen in this entire period, basically the last decade. If we look at the second quarter, we see results a little bit over or a little bit under 100 parts per billion, so from 90 to 125. And if we look at our sample results for the last 2 calendar years, Q2 of the last 2 calendar years, we see results in the 60s parts per billion. So again, we see an improving trend here. And when we look at sample results for BCMI, Bombertown, Kosher, Mackenzie Island, I'll pull up that same chart. We see a similar sort of pattern here where before we were getting results in the 60, 70, 80 part per billion range. And in the last 2 calendar years, we're in the 40, 50 range. Same with Q2, we see results in the 70, 80, 90 part per billion range versus the last 2 calendar years, 50, 60, just under 70 parts per billion. So we think we're on the right track in terms of methane and haloacetic acid disinfection byproduct removals. And we see that again in Madsen. So we see results Q1 50 to 60 range. And in the last 3 Q1s for the last 3 calendar years, we see results closer to 30, 40. So we've made some improvements in terms of balancing how much chlorine we add to the water. And we've also purchased some new analytical equipment. It's UVT, it tests for UVT, which is the ultraviolet transmittance of the water. And we think it's allowed us to better improve the treatment processes to remove more natural organics. And it's when the natural organics react with the chlorine that we add to disinfect the water that produces these disinfection byproducts. So we think we've got a good handle on disinfection byproduct removal if we look over time. For lead sampling, so section 3.7 of the annual report provides a summary of lead sampling results. The most significant lead sampling that we did in 2019 was in the Red Lake drinking water system. We sampled from 2 fire hydrants in the distribution system and from 12 plumbing locations. Each plumbing location gets 2 samples, so that's why there's 24 samples from 12 sites. And the minimum result of the lead samples we collected was below the analytical detection level. And the maximum result was 5.8 micrograms per liter. The Ontario Drinking Water Quality Standard for lead is 10 micrograms per liter. So the maximum result of 5.8 fell below the maximum acceptable value for that parameter. Also not included in the annual report, but I thought I would include in this presentation. Lead, controlling the amount of lead in the drinking water has been one of our best success stories in Red Lake. So every year we have to prepare a separate report from the ones that we're discussing here tonight. It's called a corrosion control plan evaluation report. And that provides a lot more detail on lead sampling in the current period versus previous periods that we've sampled over the past decade. So the next couple of slides that I'm sharing, I pulled from that corrosion control evaluation report. So there was a period of time when the province first mandated lead sampling, community-wide lead sampling, where every community in Ontario was sampling from residential plumbing or businesses connected to the water distribution network to get background levels of how much lead was in drinking water in general in the province. So I'm calling that in this case the pre-implementation period. So that was before we knew that the community of Red Lake had a corrosion issue and a lead problem. And once we had completed about 3 calendar years of that type of background testing for lead, we decided to implement a corrosion control plan. And that's what we're referring to here as the post-implementation period. So that's from about 2009 to present. So the average concentration of lead samples that we collected in the pre-implementation period was 9 parts per billion, remembering that the Ontario Drinking Water Quality Standard is 10. So the average was quite close to the maximum acceptable concentration. And you can imagine if the average was 9, many residential households exceeded the maximum, and there's some below. So post-implementation, after we implemented our corrosion control plan, in which we carefully controlled the pH of the water that we're sending out to the distribution period, we've seen almost a 10-fold reduction in the amount of lead in drinking water that we measure in people's homes. Also, so prior to implementation of the corrosion control plan, a full 20.6% of the samples that we collected exceeded the lead standard, whereas now, since 2009, only 1.5% of all of the samples that we've collected since 2009 have exceeded the lead standard. Prior to implementation of the corrosion control plan, 38.3% of all the lead samples we collected exceeded half the standard, or 5 parts per billion. And post-implementation of the corrosion control plan, only 5.1% of samples exceeded half of the standard.
And that average has been since 2009?
This presented here on the graph. So yes, since about 2009, that's correct. So this graph shows, again, the average lead concentration in plumbing samples. This red line here represents the pre and post implementation period. So it's not written on here in terms of calendar year. This is going to be messy. I apologize for my printing, but this is about 2009. This red line here. So prior to 2009, we can see the average lead concentration was about 10, 11. This year was a little bit lower at about 5.5 parts per billion. And then it was back up just before 2009 to about 9. So we see the average lead concentration was quite high and near that standard of 10 micrograms per liter. Post-implementation, there's a period of time where we're building up a deposit of sodium and calcium on the inside of the pipes. That's protecting the pipes from corrosion. So we see a slow decline in that average, and then we kind of plateau at the current levels for the past 6 or 7 years. So the other thing that we see plotted on this graph is the average pH of the water. And we see this decline in lead corresponds to an increase in the pH of the water. And this peach colored band, that's our target pH range that we're hoping to achieve in the pH leaving the treatment plant to maintain that corrosion control program that has been so successful in reducing lead concentrations that we measure in plumbing. And one more graph. So this last graph shows about 10 different plumbing locations. So each one of these locations represents somebody's home or a business in town. And we see the average lead results that we pulled from that home or business in the pre-implementation period versus the post-implementation period. So again, we see a very dramatic reduction in the amount of lead that we measured at these specific homes or businesses before and after we implemented our corrosion control plan. So this is what we're using as evidence to say that our corrosion control plan is having the effect that we desire. So this is a really good case study that we use in other drinking water systems that we operate that we're finding adverse lead results. Is we take the example that we've used from the Red Lake drinking water system, and we suggest that other communities do the same. If it's not a community that we operate, we try to share these results so that others might benefit from the experience that we've had in controlling lead corrosion ourselves. And so that was specific to the Red Lake drinking water system. In the case of Balmertown, Cochenour, and Mackenzie Island, it was in it back in 2008, 2009, 2010, when we were doing the community-wide lead sampling to determine what the base case was for that community. It actually was much, much better than the Red Lake drinking water system was itself. So it actually qualified for reduced sampling. So we were able to sample at a reduced frequency once every third year instead of twice a year. And then subsequently, because we still kept getting good lead results, it actually became exempt from future lead sampling. So there's never been a problem with lead in the Balmertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island drinking water system. So it's exempt from testing it again. So we only have to collect the pH of the water and measure the alkalinity from fire hydrants. And periodically, we also test for lead in fire hydrants, but we don't sample from residential plumbing in those communities anymore. In Madsen, it falls in an intermediate stage between Red Lake and Balmertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island. So Madsen is at a stage where it's qualified for reduced sampling. 2019 was a year that we did have to collect plumbing samples. And we can see from the minimum and maximum results, there's almost no difference. So the minimum result was below detection level, and the maximum result was only 1.1. Again, the standard for this parameter is 10 micrograms per liter. So the maximum result was only just over a tenth of the amount of lead that we're allowed in the drinking water, which was also a result. So other water quality testing that we conduct, as a result of our treatment processes, we discharge some processed wastewater back to Red Lake or Russet Lake. Actually, we don't. In Madsen, we discharge to the sanitary sewer system. But in the case of Red Lake and BCMI, we discharge wastewater back to Red Lake. That wastewater cannot have more than 25 milligrams per liter of suspended solids in it, in accordance with our municipal drinking water license. And in the case of Red Lake, our average result in 2019 was 17 milligrams per liter. And in the case of Balmertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, our average result was 14.7 milligrams per liter. So in both cases, we were in compliance with our municipal drinking water license. The annual report in section 3.9 presents results of our inorganic sampling. I haven't listed all of the parameters here because most of them fall below analytical detection levels, and for that reason don't need to be mentioned specifically. The one parameter I did want to highlight is sodium. There is a treatment chemical that we use in all of the treatment plants. It's referred to, the trade name for it is soda ash, but the scientific name for it is sodium carbonate. That's the chemical that we use to increase the pH and alkalinity of the water, which we talked about previously to achieve corrosion control. Being that that chemical is a sodium-based product, it does increase the amount of sodium that we have in the water. So in the case of Red Lake, we measured the amount of sodium in the water at 24.3 milligrams per liter. In the case of Balmertown, Kosher, Mackenzie Island, we measured it at 15.5 milligrams per liter, and we sampled twice in Madsen. And the first sample came back at 20.1 milligrams per liter, the second sample at 15.3. So those results do exceed the Ontario Drinking Water Quality Standard of 20. This is not considered to be strictly a health-related parameter until it reaches 200 milligrams per liter. But at 20 milligrams per liter, we do have to report it as an adverse drinking water quality incident. And physicians are advised to notify any residents that might have beyond sodium restricted diets to possibly limit their intake of drinking water because of the sodium concern associated with it. The annual report in section 3.10 lists sampling for organic parameters. Again, I won't and haven't listed all of them. There's a lot of parameters there. The reason why I'm not showing them all, in every single case, in all 3 drinking water systems, the results were found to be below the analytical detection limit. So there's nothing in there worth noting. What I did think was worth noting is we changed the time of year that we collect our annual samples. So organic sampling are samples that are conducted annually, once per year. We were previously collecting them in the winter. However, one of our drinking water systems, one of the other drinking water systems that we operate in northwestern Ontario, was collecting their annual samples in August, and they actually detected some organic chemical parameters that tie back to herbicide, pesticide, and insecticide use. So we thought our sampling in Red Lake in February wouldn't capture that, because these are chemicals that are used in the summertime. So what we did in 2019 is we collected our normal annual samples in February, but we also collected in August. So we collected 2 sets of annual samples. And going forward, we will always collect samples in the summertime, in August or July or September, so that if there was any sort of impact on the source water as a result of the herbicide, pesticide, or insecticide use, that we would actually capture it. So we thought that was a more appropriate change. So I thought that was worth noting. I would also note that even though we collected samples in August 2019, we still didn't detect any of those chemicals. Section 4 of the annual report discusses flows. And just let me look at the time here. So I will try. So I will try to speed up my presentation a little bit because I don't want to hold you too long. Suffice to say that we monitor flows, and what we see on this graph is the maximum capacity of the Red Lake system at 6,000 cubic meters per day. And what we see is all of the flows that we measured, either averages or maximums, daily treated water flow, were well below the maximum capacity of the facility. Couple more charts. The only thing I would note on the Red Lake chart, it's starting to fall off of our records here. But back in 2008, we're looking at the period of time pre-water meters. So we see the average treated water flow and the maximum treated water flow produced by the Red Lake Drinking Water Treatment Plant was far higher than we see post-water meter implementation. So there was a period of time where the Red Lake Water Treatment Plant was actually struggling to produce enough water to meet the demands of the community. And post-water meter implementation, that's no longer a concern. We see a similar pattern for the Balmertown, Kosher, Mackenzie Island, and we'll see this again for the Madsen drinking water system. The rated capacity of the facility is up here at 6,000 cubic meters per day, and the average and the maximum amount of flows that we recorded leaving the treatment facility are far lower than the rated capacity. So there's no capacity issues with the treatment facilities in any of the Red Lake communities. We also monitor these flow results. They would give us an indication of if there was something like a water main break where we were losing lots of water to leaks. So now we're looking at the Madsen flow results. So we see some months where the flows jump up a little bit from, let's say, 80, 90 cubic meters a day on average to 136. That usually represents a water main break that when we're monitoring the flow results, we bring to the attention of Red Lake Public Works, and then we work in conjunction with them to repair the leak, and then we find the values come back closer to normal. Madsen, being a small drinking water system, is very susceptible to noticing these, even a small leak gets noticed. Section 5 of the annual reports reviews adverse water quality incidents that we experienced in the 2019 calendar year. So in the case of Red Lake, there was one incident. There was a water main break that was reported as an adverse water quality incident. So it was classified as a Category 2 water main break, which means it's possible that there might have been some contamination of the pipe during repairs. So while we're repairing the pipe, quite often we're cutting into it. If the excavation, it's a hole that gets filled with dirty water, if we're able to keep the water levels down and we don't think any dirty water got back into the pipe, it's classified as a Category 1 break, where if we think that there is the possibility, even the remote possibility that some dirty water might have gotten into the pipe, it's categorized as a Category 2 break. And in this case, a precautionary boil water advisory was issued for that reason. And it was reported as an adverse water quality incident, so as a precaution. And then we collect 2 sets of bacteriological samples before to remove the boil water advisory. In the case of Bombertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island drinking water system, there was a adverse water quality incident in late June 2019. This related to a power failure. And normally during a power failure, what we see is the standby generator starts. And while normal power is unavailable, we run the treatment facility off emergency power. In this case, the battery for the generator was bad, and the generator didn't start when it was supposed to. We'll actually see the story repeat in Madsen when we look at adverse water quality incidents in Madsen. So interestingly enough, the generator battery was replaced a couple of weeks prior to this incident. So it shouldn't have happened. However, the battery that we replaced it with was bad, and it didn't perform as we expected it to. So we have a battery replacement program. Every 3 years, we replace the batteries, whether we think they need it or not, because this is an important piece of equipment, the standby generator. And it was unfortunate that a couple of weeks after we replaced the battery, according to that schedule, that we actually had a battery failure. In Madsen, so now we're looking at the Madsen drinking water system, there was an adverse water quality incident in February 2019. This was the sodium we've already talked about, so I won't provide any more details on that. Another adverse water quality incident in Madsen occurred in early June 2019. So this was a power interruption. The generator in this case started, but there was a leak in the generator exhaust. It normally exhausts to the exterior of the building. There was a leak in the exhaust pipe, and the oxygen level in carbon monoxide level in the room choked out the generator and it stalled. So that resulted in a loss of pressure to the community, which necessitated the issuance of a boil water advisory and this adverse water quality incident. And then we see the other generator incident that we talked about previously in late June 2019. It was another power interruption. The standby generator was supposed to start, and as a result of another faulty battery, in this case, the generator did not start. Pressure was lost in the distribution system, boil water advisory issued, and we had to collect bacteriological samples to have the boil water advisory removed. Subsequently, new batteries were purchased for both Cochenour and Madsen. And we also implemented a program where we conduct a load test on the batteries quarterly now to make sure that if we do have a bad battery, it gets flagged and replaced. The next two adverse water quality incidents are, again, both for the Madsen drinking water system. Both happened in December 2019. We were conducting some significant capital repair or replacement work in Madsen in December. Specifically, the distribution header that carries water from the treatment plant to the water distribution system. The entire 6-inch piping system was replaced. While that was being done, we were providing the community with water from only one of 4 high lift pumps. So we knew this was a period in which we might be vulnerable to any sort of hiccups with that one pump. So normally we have 4 pumps dedicated to this purpose. If there's a problem with one pump, the second or third or fourth pump automatically starts and takes over. In this case, because of the maintenance work that was being done, there was only one pump available. And in 2 cases, once on December the 7th and once on December the 10th, 3 days later, that one pump that we had available tripped out. It was momentary. It only failed for a couple of minutes, but that was long enough for the pressure in the community to drop, necessitating another precautionary boil water advisory and adverse water quality incident. So that happened twice during those major capital repairs. Section 5 of the annual reports also lists any incidents of regulatory non-compliance that we had. I won't, I'll just skim through these. Most of these have a common theme. So most of these pertain to record keeping and facility logbook records. So every time one of our treatment plant operators enters the treatment facility, they log into the facility, they carefully document chronologically all of their activities while they're on site in the treatment facility, who's responsible for the facility, so who is the designated operator in charge and overall responsible operator, and then they log out of the facility at the end of the day. So in a couple of cases, there is some discrepancies or some mistakes in those record keeping requirements. In this case, in the Red Lake drinking water system, the operator who was an operator in training erroneously documented another operator in training as being the operator in charge, and that's not permitted. So the only operators who can be designated an operator in charge are operators who hold a class 1, 2, 3, or 4 license. An operator in training cannot be designated an operator in charge. So that was the issue here. And this corrective action that we undertook, I'll mention it here, but it also applies to all of the other record keeping issues that we had throughout the year. We changed our facility logbooks to make it more clear what information needs to be documented and how the information should be documented. And then annually, we provide our operators in Red Lake with training on how to properly document all of their activities and records in the treatment plant. So the corrective actions, we changed our template and provided operator training. This was another record keeping issue. So this one is in Bombertown, Coast Mackenzie Island. There was a day where there was no logbook entries. So normally every day of the year has a logbook entry indicating what activity was done. And in this case, on January the 21st, there was no logbook entries. You can see that this incident actually dated back to early 2018, but the inspection was not conducted until 2019, which is why it appears in the 2019 annual report. So this was almost over 2 years ago now. And again, we changed our logbook and record keeping procedures, and we implemented some standard operating procedures and provided some operator training to make sure this type of incident doesn't happen again. Again, so this is in the Bombertown, Coast Mackenzie Island drinking water system. Again, this is the same incident that we just talked about. No logbook entries on January the 21st, 2018. In Madsen, there was an incident in which an operator was performing a routine task. They were mixing chemicals. So they were mixing their coagulant chemical. And as part of that process, they isolate a valve so that the powdered chemical doesn't clog up the pipes. After they mixed the chemical, they forgot to reopen that valve. And there was an upset in the treatment process where uncoagulated water was directed to the filters, which became a reportable incident. So the Ministry of the Environment required us to draft a standard operating procedure for that task and to provide operator training to make sure it doesn't reoccur, which we subsequently did. Also in Madsen, there was an incident. In this case, it was there was another logbook entry error. There's a requirement in Ontario Regulation 12804 that logbook entries are made chronologically. And in this case, the times at which activities were timestamped in the logbook, they were out of sequence. So activities that took place in the afternoon were recorded before activities that took place in the morning. And for the drinking water inspector, that's a concern. Obviously, the activities that took place in the morning, the logbook entry for those activities must have been recorded much later in the day. So again, we provided our operators with training on the requirement that logbook entries be made chronologically. And that was it. So happy to answer any questions that you may have. I apologize, that was pretty long again.
No, thank you very much. A lot of valuable information within that report. Am I seeing Councillor Christoph? Is your hand up?
Yes. So yeah, I just have a question. I know you kind of answered it. It happened in August. So when you guys switched to the testing, I know you had talked about the trihalmethanes. Is that what it is? And the haloacetic acids. So it seemed to spike for all of them. And then also like the alkalinity of the water went up as well at that same time. So you kind of answered about the haloacetic acids going down, but they all spiked. So yeah, it was just a question on it. How is that? Is it because it was done in August now? And I guess we'll see this August how it goes, but.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So something that I failed to mention when we were looking at these results of disinfection byproducts, trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, is there's a seasonal pattern that we see here. So we'll notice that in every calendar year, Q1, when the water's cold, produces a lower trihalomethane result than Q3, which is July, August, September. So when the water's warm, we form more of these trihalomethanes or haloacetic acids. So that pattern repeats itself every year. Our highest results are always in Q3 because the water temperature is warm. Does that answer the question so we will see that again in 2020 when we sample. Our lowest trihalomethane results will always be in Q1 and Q2, and our highest will always be in Q3 and Q4 generally.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, it was just throughout the presentation and that you answered all that. So no, that was good. I appreciate it.
Any further questions? Well, seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much for you and your staff providing our residents clean and safe drinking water, and continue doing a fabulous job for our community. So thank you very much, Jason. And thank you for that presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And you're more than welcome to stay and Zoom and watch the rest of the meeting, or you're more than welcome to depart.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to figure out how to stop my screen share. Where is it? Can you still see my screen?
Yes, so we can still see you.
Okay. How about now?
You're gone now.
I'm gone, but you can still see my screen.
I can
No,
see
we can't see your screen.
Okay, great. So I just a parting note. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and the offer that I always extend to council. If you ever want any information on the performance of the drinking water system, please let me know, and I'd be happy to present to you again.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you again for attending this unprecedented Zoom meeting. So,
Thank you.
okay, so council will carry on. So moved by Councillor Baduch, seconded by Councillor Christoph, resolved that the Council of the Corporation, the Municipality of Red Lake hereby considers sections 4 through 8 of the Part 1 consent agenda as read and adopt the items. Does any councillor have any questions? 4 through 8. Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. And moved by Councillor Baduch, seconded by Councillor Butterfield, resolved that the Council of the Corporation, the Municipality of Red Lake hereby consider all bylaws section 9 of Part 1 consent agenda as read without amendment or debate a first and second time. All in favor? Carried. And moved by Councillor Christoph, seconded by Councillor Butterfield, resolved that the Council of the Corporation, the Municipality of Red Lake hereby consider all bylaws section 9 of the Part 1 consent agenda as read a third time and pass. Does any councillor have any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Now, moving down to under new business, item 13.1 Canada Day packages. And I understand Councillor Christoph would like to have a discussion with that. So Councillor Christoph, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Mota. When we had the last discussion about Canada Day and what to do, we were just having a discussion, thinking about things, and thought about what if we were to do make up a Canada Day package. So generally, it's the kids that partake in all the festivities down at the beach. So if you were to say get a package with sparklers, stickers, face paint, tattoos, different activities that you can do that we would do on Canada Day, but have it in a package, have it so people register to say, yeah, we want one. They can come pick it up. If we have the resources, we can drop it off in certain locations as well. Just for something for them to do, so that if we don't do the Canada Day thing, they can still do it. Have them, a thought was to have them video themselves using their family, using this package, uploading it to our Facebook page or something, the municipality. You can turn that into a whole bunch of different things. You can have a contest as to who's showing the most spirit for Canada Day, anything. I was just throwing out some ideas of something that we can do, and it's not real expensive. It'll probably cost less than what we normally do Canada Day, but with situation with COVID and that, I don't know, I just thought it was a good idea. So I was just throwing that out and what everyone else thought, and if this is something we might want to tackle.
Well, I think it's something we can definitely consider. I know during our last meeting that we discussed, we're not sure about Canada Day yet, pending the pandemic and COVID-19 and gatherings of people. So I think it's something we can definitely keep on the radar and work towards. We can definitely speak to the Canada Day committee as well. I know we've purchased fireworks as previously discussed, and if we don't use them for this year due to the pandemic, we'll be able to carry them over for 2021. I don't know if any other councillors have any comments. No. Oh, Councillor Hager, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say I think that's a brilliant idea, Councillor Christoph. I think that's really super because I think it's manageable, and it also offers an opportunity because I noticed a lot of events are doing online versions. So that would be great.
For sure. And we can measure that as we get closer, again, following all the provincial guidelines and seeing what type of gatherings we can have as crowds. But we can definitely look at something, Councillor Christoph, for sure. So thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, just to add to that, I was just thinking so Norseman Days, they've postponed it till next year. They've canceled it. But this is also something, if we're going to be, if we do something like that and you're going to order different things to make these packages. It's just something that would need to have to get on that pretty quick. Just with shipping and everything takes a little bit longer. Yeah, so I just saying that if we're going to do something, and we could make that decision even though we don't know, right? If they're canceling Norseman days, they don't really know if everything could be okay then. Chances are it's probably not, and maybe this is a chance we just do this regardless of what happens anyways, and even if things do open up, we just do this anyways.
For sure, and we can have the CAO and staff look into that as well too.
We will, sure.
And they can have a discussion with our Parks and Rec department as well too. Okay, any further discussion on this topic? Okay, seeing none. Moved by Councillor Christoph, seconded by Councillor Baduch, resolved that the Council of the Corporation, the Municipality of Red Lake hereby adjourns the meeting at the call of the mayor. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone, for your dedication and attending our second Zoom meeting. So thank you again, Council, and we'll talk soon.